All right, I hope you like that opening music. Für Elise by the great Ludwig van Beethoven. And it does bring back memories to me of college and playing that great video game Galaga. Do you remember Galaga? I'm pretty sure that was the theme music to the video game Galaga, which was kind of I guess at the time, one of the more modern games. This was, when we had asteroids and Space Invaders, and so Galaga kind of came along just after that, and you were actually flying a ship, kind of like Asteroids, but the visuals were a little more sophisticated, and you had various weapons and artillery coming at you. It is Halitics. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Subscriber base is growing, but some of my videos doing well, others not so much. I'm always trying to figure out what you like, what you want to see. I loved yesterday's program. If you didn't see it with Veronica Wright, most of you did not. It has not hit like some of the others. I urge you to watch it. I think she's great. I think Veronica's great, and this is such an important topic to legalize drugs. Something that I've been calling for decades. We are facing an existential threat right now. I don't ever tire of discussing it, and indeed, I will be on Capitol Hill later today with my trusty camera. Actually, it's my phone, right? But there's a camera on the phone. With my trusty phone, I'll be taking videos, and we'll discuss our rally, the Climate Defiance event in Congress today. I'll be discussing tomorrow, so you don't want to miss that. But we have this threat. That's why we're doing it, because of the existential threat of the climate cataclysm directly resulting from the ever-increasing consumption, at least ever-increasing until the past few years, where it does seem that we've at least bent, as famous words of Barack Obama when talking about the cost of health care, which, by the way, we'll also talk about today. He said we bent back the rise, right? The cost rise of healthcare. That's actually may have been true when he said it. It's no longer true. Healthcare costs are rising at just astronomical levels. The Obamacare has simply failed to tamp down the rise in costs of healthcare to the point where most people just simply go without when they possibly think they can get away with it because of the deductibles. Even if you're insured as you're supposed to be under Obamacare, the deductibles and the amount that's the exempt amount where you have to get to a certain amount of cost before you even get reimbursed is such that people can't afford. They simply can't afford to use their insurance even, and they have to pay for it. So that's obviously a crisis, but the crisis that's even more serious to life on the planet, not just human life, is the climate cataclysm. And my solution, as you all know, it's, people say, well, you're naive, it's not going to happen, we can't do it. I've been calling for a fossil fuels tax for God knows how long. This is just Econ 101. It's economics. From when I was in college 40 years ago, 42 years ago, I started. And I took Econ 101, I believe, my first semester. Should have gone into economics. In any event, when you cause the price of any good or service to rise, demand automatically falls. It's just an ironclad rule. Now, there may be exogenous outside factors that overwhelm the impact of the price change. For example, if every other competing service or good sees its price rise even more, then obviously you're not going to have a drop in demand for the one item that doesn't rise quite as much in price. But if you cause the relative price of any particular service or good commodity to rise, its demand will drop. It's an ironclad law of economics. One of the arguments that many have made, both to me, but you see it in the media all the time, is that somehow fossil fuels don't follow that law, that they're the exception, that people are so dependent on fuel. And we are dependent on fuel, for sure. People are so dependent on fuel, goes the argument against the fossil fuels tax, that it doesn't matter how much it costs. They're going to keep burning gasoline. They're going to keep using electricity that's generated by coal-fired plants. Well, the evidence just doesn't support that. Whenever the price of gasoline rises, demand for it falls. People choose alternatives, whether it's one trip rather than two, whether it's carpooling rather than driving by themselves, whether it's walking, whether it's bicycling, whether it's taking one of those electro scooters that maybe, if you're fortunate enough, you can power with solar energy. People conserve when the price goes up. Even if exogenous factors would tend to cause them to consume more. So we are living through the hottest summer ever. In early July, the 4 hottest days in succession since we've been measuring accurately temperatures on Earth occurred. And it's not just the 4 hottest days, since the 1880s. Scientists, based on core ice samples, glacier samples. By the way, we're not going to have many more times to take samples of any of these ice cores because they're all melting. They're all mostly melted. But we still have the ability to go back in time in various ways scientifically and determine what temperatures look like. And we have not seen temperatures at this level since before the ice ages. So we're talking about 100,000 years ago is when scientists conclude that the Earth was last at the temperatures we're seeing now. And even then, there wasn't such an accelerating rise in such a short period of time to get to those temperatures. The predictions are, given how much CO2 has been pumped into the atmosphere in the past 2 or 3 centuries, we're probably looking at temperatures that the Earth hasn't seen in 50, 60 million years. So that's where we are. And yet, despite that fact, Europe's electricity systems are coping with heat. That's what your headline there from your newspaper of record, the New York Times, is telling us. And let me see if I can get your date in there too, so you can see that this is not from, say, 5 years ago. July 18, 2023, just yesterday. There's beautiful Firenze. Never been there, want to go. I think that's the Pitti Palace, but if I'm wrong, call in, tell me how I'm wrong. 240-363-7190, 240-363-7190 on Halitics. And what has happened in Europe is that there is not a massive increase in demand for electricity, despite the hottest temperatures we've seen since long before electricity. So why is that? Why aren't Europeans in Spain and Portugal and Southern Europe, which has borne the brunt of the heat this time? When I was in Europe, fortunately for me, I guess that was 2019, I believe. Last time, 2019, I think it was in Spain. Maybe it was 2018. It was before COVID. I can't remember now. Northern Europe was just broiling. England, France, Germany. And we were lucky in Spain. It wasn't so bad. Very lucky indeed. Well, it's flipped. Now the southern part of the continent is where it's really, really hot. So hence you see that picture of Florence. Although people are out there, they're still eating. I don't know whether maybe that's breakfast time. I don't know. Or late at night. It could be. I don't know. Why is it? Why aren't the people of Europe just absolutely going crazy with their use of electricity, right? I mean, there is air conditioning now, especially in the offices. You would assume that because of that heat, there'd be an increased demand for electricity to the point where there'd be blackouts, there'd be brownouts, which is what we've seen the last few times in Europe. Now, one argument, I mean, and a very reasonable one, I would think, would be that, well, they've got their grid in better shape and they're just generating more electricity. But that is not the case. We actually can only conclude they're generating in Europe less electricity. Remember that Nord Stream pipeline that somebody blew up in the what is that sea there? I don't even know. Between Germany and Russia, there's a sea. I can't remember. This is Nord Stream pipeline, and that was a major source of natural gas used to create electricity in Germany. And it was blown up, and I still can't remember the name of that damn sea, which I know the Gulf of Bothnia is north of it, but whatever it is. So that would, in fact, lead to less generation of electricity. So it isn't as though they're awash in the grid is just humming with so much electricity that they can put up with it. In fact, what we see here, well, yes, there may be fewer grid problems, which is, I guess, good. The real issue is that electric power prices remain substantially higher than in the past. The relative cost of electricity has gone up in Europe. And that is in part because of the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up. There's less electricity to be made with natural gas. It's also, you're seeing right here, a number of France's nuclear plants have been closed. And gee, that's just so sad. How awful. How awful for the people who may be able to avoid Chernobyl because those power plants are now shut. The reduction in electricity generation has perversely, ironically, helped Europe weather a weather crisis that should lead, a climate crisis that should lead to shortages. And why is that? Because the higher prices mean people are consuming less. They're just simply saying we're going to do everything possible. If we have a window air conditioning unit, we're all going to just be in that one room with that AC blowing rather than having people in 3 different rooms with 3 air conditioners blowing. Right? I mean, that's the way you address it. That's the way you deal with higher electricity. Maybe you all go to the movie theater because there's an air conditioning unit there. So there's, and that, of course, is a common area where it's more efficient for people to gather to avoid the heat rather than in their own separate apartment, house, what have you. So this is important to understand. We see in real time, while we're dealing with this crisis, that higher energy prices mean less consumption. How does that help us address the climate crisis? Well, very simple. If we raise the price of energy, then we'll consume less of it. Most items cost a lot more now than they did 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. It's not the case with gasoline. It just isn't. It's not the case with energy. And I know people are going to say, but if everything else is going up and now the price of energy goes up, I can't live. I can't survive. And that's true for so many. So, of course, the answer has to be we return to the people. And if you want to do it like on an income or wealth basis, I have no problem with that. In other words, you're entitled to a rebate for all the money that everyone puts in to pay for that tax. If, say, your income is below $150,000, what we cannot do is base your rebate on your consumption, because that would reduce the incentive to save. If you consume more electricity, you should not get any more money than someone who consumes no electricity. Some people would say, well, that's not fair. If I live in a house versus an apartment, I'm going to burn more. I'm going to use more electricity to cool my house than somebody who lives in an apartment. Well, that's too bad. Then don't live in a house, because houses are less efficient. That's unfortunate, but that's the only way we can do this. Everyone gets a certain amount back from the government, or everyone whose income is below a certain level gets a certain amount back from the government based on the total revenues created by the tax. And we would solve the climate crisis. And we can do that with imports. We can insist that our neighbors do that, our trading partners do that. We can stop the trade, the globalism. That's another huge factor. Transportation, the number one source of greenhouse gases of all the sectors. And the way we would do that is with a tariff. Very high tariffs, just to keep goods from being shipped across the oceans. Not really that, or trucked, dirty diesel trucks. Not hard. It's not hard, in other words, to come up with these solutions. They're simple. CNN doesn't want you to know that. MSNBC, Fox, they don't want you to know that, because they're profiting from burning up our planet. But these are simple solutions. All right, we'll talk more about this tomorrow. All right, let's get to the class war. And I was taken to a degree, of course, I'm never completely taken, but I was taken to a degree by this article and let's see, I was going to just show the screen. I don't think I need to. I think I can just show myself. And the headline here. Let's see. Why is that? I'll just have these tech. Arlen said, don't talk about the tech problems while you're having them. I just can't. I can't stop myself. And Arlen, by the way, if you're watching this at some point, call, please, because you're supposed to come on the program, and let's set up a time. I know you reached out to me, and I know we've had our disagreements, but I think the best place to air those disagreements, of course, when they're political, not when they're personal, the best place to air those political disagreements is right here on Halitics. We have no third rails. There's nothing that's off limits. Look, the issue with RFK Jr., this is talking about the third rails. Where he said, that the virus, and he used the word targeted. I said, he didn't say targeted. He said targeted. He said the virus targets Caucasians and blacks and white, Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Chinese, and some other are more immune, was his words. But he used the word targeted. Some people say that's anti-Semitic. Look, I would never say that. I don't know what is in his heart. I don't know that he's an anti-Semite. That remark doesn't strike me as likely to be anti-Semitic in particular. And there was an article which suggested that maybe there was some, the way the virus was either created in the lab, or which I think we all pretty much acknowledged that's how it spread, how it came about. It's a man-made virus. That when you observe this cleavage in it, which I think was created by humans, that seems to be more likely to strike certain groups of people, which I think is plausible, but not that it was by design. And there's no claim that it was by design. But also, fine, you can have a theory, but if the theory doesn't hold in the real world, which it most certainly did not in the initial wave of the pandemic, Ashkenazi Jews suffered disproportionately. And it was well documented in New York, in the UK, in Israel. Ashkenazi Jews suffered disproportionately. So it's very odd that if this virus is targeted towards Caucasians and blacks, that in Europe and in New York, Jews suffered more. And even in the United States, where the poor communities did suffer, and certainly blacks did suffer, African Americans did suffer to a degree disproportionately, the numbers aren't starkly higher for blacks, except to the extent that they were unvaccinated. And in Africa, we had by far the lowest rates of COVID infection, especially in black African countries, where as South Africa and the North African countries that are more Arabic did not see the lower rates of infection. They had higher rates. So in the real world, the theory that this virus was more likely to be virulent among certain groups rather than others proved to be completely, get it wrong 180 degrees, completely wrong. And yet RFK Jr. embraced it, or said, oh, well, it could be true. Well, no, it couldn't be. Just clearly wasn't true. And that's one of the reasons, not the only, that I'm very critical of him and of his candidacy. Certainly not the only. Also crypto, also his refusal to embrace Medicare for all. Also his fear-mongering about responses to the climate catastrophe. That somehow that is going to be used to take away people's freedoms, rather than it's the fact of the climate catastrophe itself that is what is reducing our freedom. Freedom to go outside, freedom to live, right? I mean, freedom to keep a house or a home because it's underwater now. That's the real crisis, and RFK Jr. seems utterly, or has demonstrated an utter inability to address it. That is not the case with Dr. West. He is the candidate we need to support. I bring up these criticisms, by the way, of RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, not because I want you to vote for Joe Biden. I most emphatically do not. I bring them up because if we're going to save the planet from rampant wealth and income inequality, and more, specifically the resulting climate catastrophe, we have to embrace a true progressive. And we should do it now. We should let the Democratic Party know it cannot count on our votes, that it will not get our votes. The Democrat Party needs to know that now. It needs to start shifting right now to a pro-people, pro-worker platform. Doesn't mean they'll get our votes, but they need to understand that. There can be no doubt that if the Democratic Party loses the election, it's because its policies are awful. There can be no doubt in anyone's mind that that is why it's losing. And the way we can prove that, demonstrate that, is just simply by embracing Dr. West's campaign. And finally, when it comes to the issue of a spoiler, let's not let Joe Biden, let's not let the Democrats spoil the election. Let's make sure we elect Dr. West. If they're going to use the term spoiler, then they need to own it. Hillary Clinton spoiled the 2016 election. No question about it. She spoiled it. Barack Obama spoiled the 2016 election. No doubt about it. We can't let them spoil another one. The stakes are too high. Well, so we're talking about this class war. It's a good article in The Intercept. I don't agree with everything about it, but it's what we're seeing right now to a significant degree. This is by Schwartz. It was a couple of days ago. More and more, we are seeing the 1% gobbling up virtually everything. And I even think 1% is a little bit, because it's not like there's a clean break, right? You have to cut somewhere, but there's not a clean break between the 1% and the 99%. There's not even really a clean break between the billionaires and everyone else, because after all, what's the difference between someone who has $1.1 billion and somebody who has $990 million? Not very much, and they'll be switching places now and again, depending on which stocks they own and if their businesses are doing well or poorly, or if they're, they have a good night or a bad night at the plate, or shooting free throws. So I can't really, because there are billionaire athletes now, right? We have billionaire athletes. Pretty much, I guess, the athletes who've parlayed their multi-millions from playing into um, financial empires like Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. Derek Jeter maybe in that class, I'm not sure. Some of the golfers, I think, they just in gobs of money. The warfare is the 1%. I don't like 1%. People in New York City and in the suburbs there who are probably in the, making 250, 300,000, 400,000. Sounds like an awful lot of money. It is. But to live in that area, to live in San Francisco, you're not really living that large. And you may be in the 1%. So there's no clean cutoff between the financial elites and everyone else. It's not absolutely clear cut. Maybe we say the class war is between those with multi-generational wealth, those who have so much money that their descendants for many generations will never have to work. And maybe that's a little too tight a stash. But anyway, what the point of this article is that those at the very top, the true masters, are going to start hitting hard against the people just below them. They're faithful retainers, they're lawyers. We're already seeing it when it comes to doctors, right? Doctors are, in many ways, really just now workers. They have to punch a clock, they have a certain amount of time. They're not really professionals. They get to see one patient, then they have to see another. If they want to get their full compensation, they can't spend more than a certain amount of time with any one particular patient. They really are not free to practice, to pursue their profession in the way that the Hippocratic Oath obligates them. And this has been true of lawyers for many years, although lawyers have kind of done it to themselves rather than through private equity, which tells the doctors when the private equity people like Bain Capital, right, the Romney Group, purchase, or Bill Frist Hospital Corporation of America, when they purchase these suppliers, these providers, they tell the employees, the doctors, what they can and can't do. They tell the nurses what they can and can't do. Nurses have some advantages because they're unionized. They tell the physician's assistants what they can and can't do. Lawyers kind of did it to themselves, right, with the law firms. It was a law firm is owned by the lawyers, the partners. It's not owned by some private equity, although we are seeing that in law as well. But the lawyers did that to themselves. I guess they just said, hey, we like to work 10, 12 hours a day. We like to force our associates, and a lot of the partners work just as crazy. We like to force our associates. We're going to pay them $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year. They better be available round the clock. And they're getting rich, but they're not getting into that elite generational, multi-generational wealth class, with very, very, very few exceptions. A few of the lawyers, a few of the if they run the biggest firms, the most profitable firms, they may get up into that, I don't know, $200, $300, $500 million stratosphere. Some of the top bankers get there, but very few investment bankers if they're working at a firm. So what this article is saying, hey, is those 1%ers are coming for you. And we see it. So we see it and I really am more, and I don't say I'm so conversant, but I've been following a little tiny bit the Hollywood strikes. And that's right. I mean, those actors, now they're not the Matt Damons or the Jennifer Lopez's, but people you see on TV when you watch SVU or watching the Netflix series. You think, well, hey, their faces are familiar. They must be doing pretty well. And if they're on a series, they're doing okay. A lot of times they're not doing that great. They may not be getting residuals. And trust me, whatever they're getting, the production companies, the producers, are doing everything they can to reduce that amount, to keep them from getting more, to force them to take less, in fact. This is a story of capitalism right now. This is a story of humankind. It's not just, I don't want to just attribute it to our particular form, our particular economic system. This is humankind. Landowners, nobles, aristocrats, wealthy peasants, whatever. They always did their best. Peasant landowners always did their best to keep wages as low as possible, pay as little as they could, keep people ignorant. This is just what we are, who we are. We want more for ourselves and less for everyone else. I mean, that's just who people are. So the question is and that's what my problem is a little bit with this article. I don't feel like it completely captures what it completely reflects, I guess, the reality of human nature. But he does a nice job, the author there, Smith. I think, is that his name, Smith? Whatever it is. And he brings up Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, and how Adam Smith was really very radical. And Adam Smith was very, very harshly critical of the ownership class. And he points out that these nobles, these aristocrats, because that's who the ownership class would have been in the 18th century when he was writing. The feudal, still the dukes and the lords, and also some incredibly successful merchants and other business people. And he notes that their maxim, their vile maxim, as he calls it, is all for ourselves and nothing for other people. And he says that is the vile maxim of masters of mankind all through every age of the world. So Smith clearly got it. Doesn't matter who you are, factory owner, slave owner, doesn't matter. Your attitude is you want all for yourself and nothing for anyone else. That's what being a human part of, not all of, because there are generous altruistic sides. I mean, we're mixed. We're all some of some and some. Capitalism, it seems, and just wealth inequality breeds it in and of itself selfishness. The fact that we have some people with so much, with everything, and other people with nothing at all, I think is a big factor in why we see all this corruption, for example, in the Supreme Court. When you have a much more equal society, you have less corruption for a number of reasons. For one thing, the benefit of being corrupt is reduced because you can't live that much better than everyone else. The penalty for not being corrupt is reduced because you can't live that much worse than anybody else. And the value of corrupting someone is reduced because, again, whatever you get is going to be largely taxed away. So the real solution has to be a society where everyone, and this is the general solution, but the ultimate solution, everyone has enough and no one has too much. How do we get there? Very high top marginal tax rates, guarantees for everyone, for health care, for everything else. Now, we'll get into that in just a bit. A guy got about 15 minutes left, 20 minutes left. I'm going to probably try to end a little early today. But I do want to just show a little more from this article by John Schwartz. That's in Intercept a couple days ago. So he says the reason he says, back in the 1940s, Schwartz gets his I think this was kind of a sloppy article. I'm citing it because I think there are insights that are very, very valuable. But I think it's sloppy because he attributes the great reduction in wealth and income inequality. What we saw our highest levels were in the 1890s, again in the 1920s. There was massive inequality, and now we're echoing those times today. But it was the Great Depression. It was not World War II that first brought about some measure of economic fairness, some measure of economic justice. It was not World War II. It wasn't that the son of a national Citibank executive, which of course became Citibank, which became Citicorp. It wasn't that the son of a New York bank executive became a little more cognizant of the struggles of the working class because he was in a foxhole with a factory worker. It wasn't that. It was just that we had a president in 1932-33 who said, we got to change this, that this is not going to work. We can't have such an unjust system. We have to have a government that creates jobs, that actually employs people, and where we also guarantee people retirement with Social Security. And we also have to have much, much higher taxes on the rich. That's what changed it. The New Deal, which started in 33, not in 44. That is what created a real a society, a real middle class, or a society that was, in some measures, much fairer, much juster than the ones that preceded it, or that, frankly, we're seeing now follow it. But it's true, it is true that there was a period of time in the mid 1900s in the United States where there was some measure of justice. All right, let me take a call. I always like to take my calls. I never like to keep people waiting. So let's see. We got John. Hey, John. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. I read that article. I thought it was a good article. But
good to hear from you, John. I know you've been busy on Facebook. Hey, it's early for you though, right? It's pretty early, so I appreciate your calling in.
Oh yeah, not really. I prefer when you broadcast this early because it gives me a chance. When you do it later in the day, I can't. I'm at work and I can't listen.
I think you've told me that. I should have remembered. I do remember you telling me. I'll keep that in mind. Although I'll probably still keep the little bit later time because it seems to suit more people. Anyway, what's on your mind, my friend?
What I remember about this article is that it wasn't World War II. It was World War II that brought on the realization of the 1% that they can't have it all. It wasn't that wasn't when the changes started happening. During the 30s, Roosevelt was trying to implement change, and you still had a conservative Supreme Court that was trying to shoot down everything he did. So at that point, they were still very much resistant to any change, even though there were long food lines and people were starving and suffering, and we didn't care. It took war and exposure to the horrors of war and the real prospect of losing what they had. I mean, even these wealthy people don't want dictators running the world because it destabilizes their lives too. But I think that's what the author was trying to say.
Yeah, that may be, John. If so, I can't say I read it closely. It struck me that he was making a different point, but the point you just made, I agree with, and I would also note if the author made it, I agree with that too. There's no question that there was fierce resistance to the New Deal by the elites, and they did not support Roosevelt. But I attribute the change as I think where I have a problem with the author, and you can respond to this, is he views the democratization of America in terms of economics. He views it as it happened because the elites allowed it to happen or were willing for it to happen, and that we went in the opposite direction when the elites stopped. I mean, he's very clear about that it wasn't somehow the government. It was just that elites made a calculation at one point that they were okay with sharing wealth, and then they made another calculation at a later time they were no longer. But I don't accept that, because that to me takes away any autonomy, any agency by the voters. And I think the voters can make a difference. It seems like maybe that's wrong. But I think if we join together and support truly progressive candidates, we can make a difference. The author, I don't think, acknowledges that or agrees with that. Maybe you don't either.
Yeah, I think I do agree with that. I just think there's a roadmap for that we have to carefully follow, because we're in a very precarious situation. I think that it's way safer to get progressives in through an established party than it is to break away and start the third party, because we're on the precipice of falling into authoritarian rule. And then it doesn't matter how much you protest, they respond to your protests with bullets. So you fall into that trap, you stay in that trap for a very long time. And so I believe that the way to stay out of that trap is to reform an already established party rather than abandon it and try to, start a new party or support, bring in a third party. I think that right now will be our undoing.
Well, there's a number of areas where we've disagreed online about this, and I accept that premise that you make. I disagree with it because I don't see the evidence, and this is what I'm going to ask you to close with, because I don't have that much time. It's not to get rid of you. I love talking to anybody who calls in, but especially you, John. But here's why I have a problem with the premise that you just made. I don't see the evidence that progressives change the Democratic Party. But I see the evidence seems very strong to me that the Democratic Party corrupts progressives, people who I think really do have, or at least go into government with good intentions. And I would just start with one example. I give you plenty of time to respond, but I will start with Barack Obama. But I'll put in Pramila Jayapal. I'll put in AOC. I think those are three people, and there are plenty of others I could name. I'm not going to. Who I think went into government with all the best intentions, and yet I think they have been corrupted by the system to the point where they are not allies.
That's not my perspective. What I see is they find that they don't individually have enough power to change anything, and so they have to do the best they can, and they work within the system that exists, and they're waiting for the voters to give them more support so that they can overtake the establishment, the established part of the Democratic Party, because there just aren't enough progressives. The Democrats on some legislation are aligned with what used to be mainstream Republicans. And I'm sure that progressives don't like that. They don't like voting for, an $850 billion defense package. But there's still enough votes there, Republican votes and establishment Democrat votes, to get around the progressives. So they're not just even up just against their own party. They're up against their own party, plus the Republican, not just establishment, but these new radical Republicans. So they just don't have the critical mass that they need to start that fusion reaction and start throwing their weight around. They don't have it. So what we have to do is get progressives in the primaries, get them to where they can win and start taking over seats. And then if we can get, you need a majority of progressives and that's, and what I mean is, what is it, 218 or 200 and...
Yeah, that's right. That's right. 200, right. Because
are you going to get...
That's right.
Are you going to get 218 progressives?
But do we? But you know what? The Freedom Caucus, and we're not going to. We've debated this for a long time. We're not going to solve it. But I would just point out, and then you get the final word, and then I gotta cut you off, John, because I got to move along, and I got to get out of here before 11 East Coast time. The Freedom Caucus has a lot fewer votes than the so-called Progressive Caucus. And yet look at how much the Freedom Caucus was able to bring to its base. Far more than the Progressive Caucus seems to bring to its base.
Yeah, red meat. And they got a lot of money behind them too. They can run attack ads, and they've got their own propaganda channel. They've got a lot going, they've got a lot of help. Let's just say that. it got a lot of help.
Well, I think that's a fair answer. I don't disagree with that. John, let me cut you off. I apologize for doing that. I really appreciate your calling in. As I mentioned, I only have so much time this morning, especially. So just back to the article real quick, and if I missed some of the nuances or glossed over important aspects of it, where Schwartz says it was the New Deal that started the process of redistributing wealth down, mea culpa. In any event, Schwartz then, he pivots to the 70s, 80s, when we saw wealth starting to gush upwards with trillions, literally trillions of dollars transferred from the working and middle class, basically, wiping out large swaths of the middle class, gushed upwards to the elites, the corporate owners, financiers. And he writes the technocratic class. He means by that lawyers, doctors, professors, journalists, professional class, basically, that watches with equanimity. That is absolutely true. There is no question. I remember that period of time. And I was probably a member of the technocratic class, or at least this child, a son of members of the technocratic class, was certainly born into a very privileged background. And, my family was liberal, and there were issues. They didn't like the fact that poverty rates were starting to go up and working people were getting paid less. But hey, our lives were good. Our life was good. Our life was good. It was, and this was true for, my friends who were, also either in that class or even higher up on the totem pole. I remember a lawyer saying, hey, I made far too much money over the past 20 years. It's not right. It's obscene how much my law firm, the profits my firm has made. But hey, I'll take it. So that's the equanimity. There wasn't outrage. There wasn't anger. There wasn't resentment. And for some members of that technocratic class, times were not good. We saw journalists, getting paid less and less. Teachers' salaries barely kept pace. I don't think professors were doing, depending on their field, right? If you were in the science, STEM, you'd probably do okay. But if you were in liberal arts, not so much. So, and again, lawyers, right? I mean, their salaries were going up, but they were working longer and longer hours. They had less and less control, and they were working for fewer and fewer people, as there was consolidation of big firms and consolidation of corporate power. So the situation was probably maybe a little bit better. Times got better generally for the technocratic class, but not that much better. And in some ways, it got worse. And yet the process was observed or participated in with equanimity. Now the day of reckoning has come. The elites have squeezed everything they can out of poor, struggling, work. Pretty much. It's going to be pretty hard to get more out of poor, struggling, working people. I mean, they're pretty much at the juice is kind of out of that lemon. But there's still wealth in, large parts of society that don't have tremendous corporate power and political power. And that's where the billionaire class is looking to get its wealth going forward, to increase its share even more, to get even more bigger piece of the pie. And we're seeing that certainly with that strike, right? We're seeing the reaction to the taking with both hands by the elites, with the strike in Hollywood, as actors are getting less and less because of streaming services. Their residual deals aren't working out. Healthcare becomes more and more expensive, and fewer of them are getting it. I just want to pat myself on the back. I wrote all about this. This is not that article in, what do we call it again? Intercept was good. I think I foresaw it, maybe wrote about it even more. This was an article I wrote back in 2016, over 7 years ago now. And it was in advance of the 2016 presidential race, or during the primary season. I was all in for Bernie. Bernie was more of a populist then. He has certainly turned his back, in my view, largely on working people. But I was just really, really harshly critical of Clinton at that point. And I wrote this article. It was tongue-in-cheek. It was facetious, whatever, sarcastic, sardonic. A letter from a billionaire class to Hillary. And he apologizes. And this was the focus of one section of it, was these H-1B visas. These were these visas that Hillary had supported when she was a senator in New York, and that the Democrats agreed to, that George W. Bush also wanted, which made it a lot easier for immigrants from Sri Lanka and India to come to the United States and work for a period of time and then return to their native countries. We saw this most uglily, and they did not have, there's no path to citizenship for them. There's no path to citizenship. We saw this most uglily, I think, when Disney hired a bunch of foreign workers, brought them in, and forced its current permanent staff to train them before the staff was dismissed. Some of the workers would return to their nations of origin, where they would work remotely. And so what I wrote was, some of these smart guy techies thought I couldn't run my business without them. The hell I can't, and I owe it all to you, Hillary, to increase the number of visas for skilled foreign workers, and importing a bunch of Sri Lankans and Indians has made me another piss pot full of money. So that is the exact point of that article in Intercept, is that wherever possible, the corporate owners, the business owners, the multinational owners are going to do whatever they can to press down, tamp down on everybody who they pay money to, and pay them as little as they possibly can. So that clearly was something that was happening, not just today, not just yesterday, but during the Obama administration before. Real quick on the similar strike, although I don't know if I would call actors exactly technocratic, but they have a skill, they have a talent that few have. And I know I don't have it. And that talent has generally meant that they can live a pretty decent life, especially if they're fortunate enough to be beautiful, fortunate enough to be physically, unique, like someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I don't know how good an actor he is. I guess he's passable. I guess he's good enough. He's the highest paid guy in Hollywood right now. Or if they're funny. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can make money as an entertainer, and entertainers have tended to live, at least at the top, damn well. But now we're seeing that they're struggling mightily. And whatever deals had been worked out in the past to try to, make sure that even lesser, lower wage workers, people lower on the scale, would do all right, that's fraying. The residuals, the benefits, they're pretty much gone. So this is from our friends over at CNN, and this is a pretty good article from yesterday, 2 days ago. Why celebrities are striking. The average pay for actors may surprise you. And the average pay about $28,000 a year. So I mean that's poverty, right? I think you're in poverty. If you live in Los Angeles, they don't all live in LA. Some live in New York and all around the country. But if you live in Los Angeles or New York and you're making under $30K a year, you're not doing well. You're poor. You're really. Now, I mean, I know obviously, if you've got a great hit series or you're, movie star, then obviously you're doing great. And who is that? I was thinking of she's in this. The kids used to love to watch her on The Wizards of Waverly Place. Can't remember. She came from a really poor background. Wrote about it, and it's great. Good for her. It's really exciting when someone is able to make it. And I think she's talented. I can't remember. She's on this show, No Murders in the Building, or Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin. I don't know. She's Selena, I guess. Is it Selena Gomez? Yeah, Selena Gomez. Right. There was a Selena, and I guess she was named for Selena. Selena Gomez, right. So she's, if you're Selena Gomez, life is great. But apparently, less than half of all SAG members, much less than half, even get health care. It's a $26,470 is the minimum you need to earn as an actor to get health care, and so many don't have it. Well, that's why they're striking. And this is a perfect example of people with talent, with skill, don't make a lot of money, and they're getting crushed by the elite class. That's why I always say you have to be for a society, for building a society. Now, John and I disagree on how to do it. I don't think the Democratic Party can do it. I don't think that the Democratic Party is a vessel that will take us there. He believes that it's more plausible to have a Democratic infiltration, and that the alternative, the Republican fascism, is such that we can't risk it. Yeah, I don't see a lot of difference. I don't think working people see much difference. They're just trying to survive. And I think there's a lot of examples of Democratic fascism. This endless war in Ukraine is a good example of that. The anti-democratic way the president jammed in the dirty debt ceiling deal, approval of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, totally running roughshod over the wishes of the people in that region. That's fascism. It's not democracy. It's not freedom. That's fascism. I don't think the Democrats are going to get us to where we have to go. I think they're making things worse. And I don't think anyone who runs in the Democratic primary can be trusted to do what's right. I think we've seen them co-opted over and over. It's my show. I get to talk more about this. Let me just play this final clip. This is why I don't support him for president. I don't support the man in the middle for president. I mean, this is one example of why. And this goes directly to that issue of the SAG members paid so little that they don't even have health care.
As you know, every other developed nation in the world has universal health care. Do you support universal health care through a Medicare for All program or something similar?
I would say my highest ambition would be to have a single payer program, which, with people who want to have private programs can go ahead and do that, but to have a single payer program that is available to everybody. I don't know how politically realistic that is, but, if you ask me if I were designing the system from the beginning, that's what I would do. You're right.
All right. I mean, that's not single payer, right? It's not single payer where there's private health insurance on top of government insurance. That's not single payer. Single payer means one payer. He said there'd be more than one payer. And you'd automatically then have a two-tiered system or it'd be a multi-tiered system because you'd also have lots of private insurers. So he's not for single payer. And he even said, like Obama said, well, if we were starting from scratch, I probably would support, single payer. He says, if I were starting from scratch, RFK Jr. says, if we were starting from scratch, I still wouldn't support single payer. So he isn't for the necessary policy to bring about some measure of equality, some measure of justice. Yet we have some kind, it's just that simple. He isn't for it. He's for various kinds of healthcare with the elites, the rich, getting better than everyone else. And that's going to ultimately starve the government provided healthcare. That's why it works so well in Japan and in the UK and Canada, because the government really does pay for the healthcare. The only time it doesn't work is when neo-libs take over and take, the necessary resources away. And yet, despite all that, it's much more efficient. The single payer system leads to better results for much less money. And RFK Jr. is against it. I'll tell you what he's for. He's for crypto. He's for the possibility that COVID targeted Caucasians and blacks while providing some measure of immunity to Jews and Chinese, despite the complete absence of, despite the fact that the evidence completely contradicts that claim. Well, we don't know about the Chinese because China is so opaque with its details. All right, I'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk more about the climate crisis. Thanks for being part of Halitics.